This is my first ever press conference. Me and Wayne Rooney, 1v1.
This is Elias Burke, an inspiring football journalist breaking headlines in football media. Initially growing up in the UK, Elias finished school at the University of Liverpool, then signed with the Athletic, and is now sharing the most profound stories the world has never heard.
That's such an interesting story.
But how did he become successful at such a young age?
That was a dream come true.
And so in this conversation, you'll pick up his blueprint for writing a compelling story, discover the reality of working in pro sports production, and learn how he actually achieved his dream of reporting to his hometown club.
What was life like growing up for you?
I grew up in an area called Birmingham. I'm a West Brom fan, had a season ticket. I went to every home game, was into film, TV and that kind of stuff, but football was always number one for me. Whether it was playing it, watching it, reading about it. Sunday morning, it was Match of the Day, which is this show in England that condenses all of the action from the Premier League that weekend, and it has Gary Lineker on it, Alan Shearer's on there, Ian Wright, all of these new kind of pundits. And then I'd play my own game at like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock.
Who inspired you? Was there someone in their game you always looked up to?
The people that inspired me the most naturally are just like family members, my parents, my brother, my grandmother. But in terms of like in the game, I always loved Thierry Henry. He was my favorite player growing up. Cesc Fabregas. I was a massive Cesc Fabregas fan. I loved reading books. Anything that was kind of sports related would inspire me. On the television, I just loved the kind of constant discussion on Super Sunday and that kind of things. I've always just kind of thrown myself into football. I've been listening to podcasts all the time. That gives me ideas. No matter who it is, whether it's someone right at the top of the game or, you know, like a younger person who's kind of sharing their views. So I wouldn't say there were specifically certain people that inspired me, but it was always the collective of football, really.
I know you went to the University of Liverpool. You studied history and politics. How has that impacted your journey so far?
It's a funny one because I've never actually gone to school for journalism. It's one of those really transferable courses. But I think university was just so good in building confidence and building character, putting yourself in a new environment. I played for the football team there as well. Guardiola came into the university and did a talk for us one time, which was like incredible. Asking questions, it was like a privilege that you couldn't even imagine. There was so many great opportunities that we had, and we went to all these different games and working towards big deadlines on pieces that were really long.
What did your day-to-day schedule look like as a football writer for The Athletic?
It was really kind of lucky, to be honest. Essentially, it was called like a talent ID program, and they put us through different challenges that we could do. Like they got all these people to pretend to be different people, and you had to try and find out what you're supposed to be looking for. There were little writing things, there were little podcasting things, but I must have impressed because the chief editor then followed me. A couple of months later, I got a message. They were running some kind of internship over the summer. It was over the Euros. I learned so much. I got to work with real qualified editors, all of these talented journalists. I think we had like 6 pieces to do in a couple of months. Got to interview lots of interesting people, explore stories in a way that I'd never done before. And then fortunately after that, they gave me a real job, which I was like super grateful for.
After that summer of 2021, I know you moved into like a freelance writer role at some point. How was your experience with that?
I was really only a freelancer for about a month. It was different, obviously, the fact that you don't have that editor over you. It probably wasn't the best thing for me because when I don't have someone kind of pressuring me and you don't have the advice guiding me along with them, maybe I'll write 500 words today and make sure they're really good 500 words. Whereas like normally I have to write 2,000 words and they have to be good because I'm writing them for The Athletic and I've got an editor over me. But you know, I was fortunate that it was only for such a short amount of time because I'm not sure what would have happened.
I know you did some reporting with Derby County. What was your role as a reporter? Do you have to go to every single home versus away game?
My first proper job at The Athletic was Derby County reporter, writer, kind of a bit of both. Reporting is like finding the parts of the story. Let's say there's a player I want to do a profile about. The reporting part of that process would be then to find out about who his agent is and this kind of situation he grew up in. And then the writing part of that is then to kind of get it out, write it all up and get it onto The Athletic. That role was amazing. Like I traveled to every home game, every away game. I saw Wayne Rooney a few times a week because he was a Derby manager at that time. My first time with him in person was an away game at Preston North End, and he'd already done the press conference. It was COVID. We didn't have a press room to go into. They were all done outside. So they'd done it, and I kind of saw him on the side. So I kind of walked over, hovered, and I was like, oh, can I do it 1v1? And this is my first ever press conference. Me and Wayne Rooney, 1v1, completely gobsmacked. I used to have football shirts with Rooney on the back and everything. It was just unbelievable. But he was super nice, really, really cool guy. And then writing 3 pieces a week, going to every game, it's tiring, but it's a lot of fun. It's a shame what happened to them that season. They got relegated. But outside of that, the story was great. The fans were great. I got my first season reporting on a club, having to think of ideas, always speaking with my editors. What can I do that other people aren't going to do? Because that's what we try and do at The Athletic. You know, a lot of the time now in journalism, you're writing all the time and you don't get the time to actually build out a story and report it properly. But at The Athletic, we get that time, fortunately. So it's a privilege, and that was my crash course, working in that Derby role.
After that, you did reporting for West Brom. Was that like a surreal experience?
Reporting on West Brom was great. That's my club. That's a club I know better than any other club in the world. So if you can't be a West Brom player, the best thing to do is get paid to go and watch them. That was a dream come true. It was really, really cool. Obviously had a great connection with the fans immediately, because that's what I am. I am a fan of the club. One thing that will always kind of stay with me was my last press conference, and I'd only been there for 6 months. The manager, he came out and he brought me a shirt with my name at the back, signed by all the players, which was like, you know, amazing. It was super cool. In terms of differences, yeah, massively, because I knew the club so well. With Derby, I kind of had to learn about the club. It's not Manchester United or Arsenal or Chelsea, where you just by kind of following football and following the Premier League, you know all about their history because you see it every week. So I had to learn about their history, how they got into this financial mess, which was really difficult because it was something that I was kind of learning on the fly. I was doing as much research, but there was always times where you kind of felt you weren't the kind of authority on the matter, which you've got to try and be. But for West Brom, as I say, I've been following them since I was a little kid. As soon as I walked into the door there, I was as knowledgeable as anyone. It wasn't always so easy on the field for the club. For the first kind of few months, they weren't doing very well at all, and they had to sack their manager, and I had to write a difficult piece about how the manager wasn't very good. Writing those kind of pieces is never fun because he was a really nice guy. Steve Bruce, Manchester United legend, he wasn't very good for us, but that's how it goes sometimes. You mean, they're the kind of things you have to do as a journalist.
Have you had any like trouble being as a writer or reporter to like coaching staff, players, or even fans?
Naturally, it kind of happens maybe a few times with managers because you have to ask them difficult questions when things aren't good, and they don't want to answer difficult questions, a lot of them anyway. They often don't think that they're the problem. They think that all these other things are the problem, which, you know, sometimes is the case, but he's the person that is at the end of the day responsible for the performances and the record of his team. Oftentimes they don't want to answer those, which can kind of lead to a bit of friction, especially with the more senior ones. They've kind of seen everything and they've answered every question in their lives. As long as you kind of approach it with respect, they tend to be okay. In terms of fans, I've been really fortunate, to be honest. Maybe because I'm a younger guy, maybe because, especially with West Brom, I knew the club, I was a fan. They were always very nice to me. They were always kind of very open and welcoming. And I mean, even now I'm constantly getting messages from supporters. You get somewhere like, you know, that wasn't good, or we don't think that's right. But you got to have a kind of thicker skin to work in an industry like this. The news only lasts for about a day. Once that's over, everybody forgets about it, then it's on to the next thing. That's just the way football works. In that sense, I'm fortunate to work in an industry that forgets quite quickly.
These days, there's been a lot of clickbait just to get a few more eyeballs on your piece. How does like marketing impact media distribution today? How does the hook or the title of your article, how do you formate that?
Clickbait is something that we try not to do at The Athletic. That you often see like 10-word titles on an Athletic piece because we kind of try and tell the story or what's going to be in the story in the piece. We don't lead with shocking detail and stuff, which, you know, is part of the industry. Like, that's how a lot of companies make their money, and it's the worst feeling ever. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to grab your audiences. So sometimes on my tweets, I'll pick out a few things from my pieces, the things that I think are the most kind of grabby, and then put them into a tweet or something and then tweet out. It would make no sense to then put a title that doesn't put any of that in. We never want to be negative, especially with me. Like, I never want to pour pressure on people. We're in the age now of being conscious about mental health, and you got to realize that a lot of these players and managers and everyone involved in football are people too. They're humans too. They have feelings, and these things really do affect people. But at the same time, you got to do your followers a service and present things how they are. Even if you've got some negative news to report, you've got to go about it in the right way, because that's our job as journalists. You've got to show what's happening, and then it's for them to make their own viewpoints on that.
What are the steps for writing an article from start to finish?
It differs, to be honest. Things happen so quickly. The best example I've got is Messi. For a long time, we all were aware that Messi might be coming to Miami. So it's something that we've spoken about, how we're going to formulate it, what are the kind of things that we can hit, how can we maximize that as a company. We've got so many other things to worry about. The season's going on, Champions League is going on. And then overnight, it seemed like Messi was coming to Miami, and then you've got to write the story on it. And believe me, that's not easy. Writing a piece that is good enough to go on the New York Times or the Athletic takes a lot of skill, a lot of hard work, a lot of time and dedication and help from editors. The best example is when Steve Bruce got sacked from West Brom. I was in a position to write that very well as soon as he got sacked, because I'd spoken to players, I'd spoken to agents, I'd spoken to all sorts of people, had all of this stuff. And then a few hours after he got sacked, I was in a position to then put that piece up. So it entirely depends on the situation, really.
Do you ever feel limited as a creative writer, or do you feel like you have the freedom?
I mean, today the piece went up about Taika Waititi's new film. It's called Next Goal Wins, and I went to the premiere of that a couple of days ago.
Soccer's not in their DNA. They're weak. They are not weak.
That was super Hollywood. And then I've got a piece coming up in the next couple of days about cricket, which to an American audience is nothing, but the Cricket World Cup is coming here and it's coming to the Olympics in 2028. Something to inform the American audience about a new sport that is the second biggest sport in the world, but in America, people don't know about that or don't care about it. So I've written all sorts of pieces. I've written pieces about people that sell trainers and watches and shoes to football players. There are things that we tend to stay away from a little bit, like politically, but in general, if it's interesting, if it's got an audience, my editors are normally like, yeah, go ahead.
I kind of want to talk about the business of writing. Do you just distribute it online? How many articles are you looking to get a week? How much do you have to write?
I'm full-time, so it's a salary that I get. To some people, it's contract, but most people that are full-time get paid a certain amount. That doesn't reflect on how much you write. You could write nothing in the month and you get paid the same amount as if you write 10 pieces in the month. But there are some people actually that write infrequently, but when they write something so great, or like they take so long in reporting all of their pieces that 3 or 4 articles a month are good for them, because it means that they kind of explode. They get loads of viewers, lots of comments, lots of interest. Whereas some other people, especially younger journalists, they're prompted to write more and more. So if you're writing 3 times a week, 4 times a week, it seems a good thing for a young journalist. But when you're older and you've got all that experience, you know exactly what you're doing. In terms of the business, it kind of depends on where you're working. At The Athletic, we're fortunate that we get pretty decent salaries. We still accept freelancers at The Athletic, so they get paid per piece.
Now that you're in LA, what's your opinion on like the Hollywood strike? Do you think it's like good or bad for the industry?
I'm always 100% for any kind of striking. If you feel like you need to unionize to kind of be able to get your points across and be able to be heard and get paid fairly, go ahead and do it. It's something that obviously has taken a massive hit to Hollywood. It's really interesting how it's kind of happened, actually. Like my waiters and stuff, the staff at Chipotle, you ask them a bit about their lives and they're like, yeah, I'm an actor and I was a working actor, but because of all this strike, I haven't been able to work for like 6 months. You know, it's like, wow, this person's like, you know, really successful, but to kind of pay their bills and having to find a job in a different industry because nothing's happening or nothing was happening. So it was kind of eye-opening to me as someone not from Hollywood.
2023 has been a rise of AI technology. How do you think stuff like ChatGPT and AI has influenced writing?
Unfortunately, I really worry for the people that are doing these clickbaity kind of pieces because they're more prone to get taken by AI than someone like I am. The pieces that I write take a lot of reporting. ChatGPT, fortunately, it can't speak to people, and it might not always be to the right standard, and you'll need an editor for that. But at the same time, like people coming out of college or out of university, for example, their first job might be doing one of those kind of clickbaity things, taking a few quotes and then filing a 600-word piece on it. These jobs are going to be taken by AI, which is scary, to be honest.
What are your thoughts about false information on social media? A lot of industries are just trying to build trust with their audience. Are you worried about the industry at all?
It's a big problem in the modern age. We've heard enough people speak about fake news. We have a very kind of strict procedure in how we go about our sourcing of pieces. Like we tend to try and get 3 sources before we publish anything, which in a lot of cases, people that don't have editors, they can get one source and then go with that. I know that's not particularly misinformation, fake news, but it could be. Obviously, there are some people that go about their whole brand on social media and Twitter, just putting out fake news because anyone could be saying anything and anyone can buy hundreds of followers and buy themselves a blue tick and then look like a real journalist. That's why it's so important to report things that you know to be true and to lean on these reputable outlets.
Do you feel that there's like a pressure about football news? And is there like a pressure to be the first one that makes it public just so they get the first few eyeballs? But obviously at the end of the day, you want to do quality versus quantity.
It's all about quality versus quantity, and it's not always about being fast. If you can be first and be correct, that's great. 100% of the time you've got to be correct. Like if you want to be first to everything, right? You want to break the story. David Ornstein at The Athletic is so great at breaking stories, but what makes him even greater is that you know it's going to be right. We have such a stringent process and he's such a professional journalist that when there's a transfer story or anything like that, you know that it's going to be correct because he sourced it so well. A lot of the time when people that haven't tied themselves to these reputable outlets, when they go out and put something out first, you never can be quite sure whether it's going to be true, right? But it just takes one story. If you get a story wrong on a transfer, you know, there's been so many really, really good journalists that have got transfer stories wrong and then everybody hammers it for them for the rest of their life. You've got to be correct. It's 100% the most important thing. But as I say, if you can be correct and first, then you've hit the jackpot.
What are the 3 qualities every great writer needs to have?
You've got to be like super meticulous. You got to look at each sentence and how can I improve that sentence? Does that sentence read perfectly? You've got to take the job of a journalist seriously. There's an audience out there that's reading all of your stuff. They pay for your work. In my case, my job as a journalist is to provide them with true, accurate and well-reported news. I think the next one is just trying to be yourself, man. It's not easy to be yourself in a world of journalism when there's so many really, really good journalists. You see someone do it super, super well and you think, oh, how can I be this great writer? And you look at their pieces and you write them in exactly the same way that they do. And the best you'll ever be is a parody of them. You'll never actually be yourself, and you never set yourself apart from anyone. So you always got to try and be yourself, and you become really comfortable in that, then you'll reach the top.
What are the 3 best tips you have for storytelling? We've all heard of the hero's journey before. Storytelling is part of movies, books. I mean, it's everything.
I think attach yourself to something that's really interesting, first of all. If you know that the story is interesting, then remember the things that make it interesting. Don't get sidetracked in the silly things. You're trying to frame the story too much, and you take too much of the filler stuff from a film or a book or whatever you see. Focus on why it was interesting to you. Why was this story special? The piece that I just wrote about Next Goal Wins, there was a Dutch-American coach. He went to American Samoa, who'd never won a game in their history. They lost 31-0 to Australia 10 years before. Their centre-back was transgender. Their striker eventually played in the NFL. The goalkeeper was so bad, every night he'd go on FIFA and beat Australia 31-0 with American Samoa because he hated it that much. That's such an interesting story. So focus on those things. Don't ever forget about the things that make it super interesting to you. 2, try and be authentic. Don't try and take from other people's interpretations of a story. Try and focus on why it was important to you. Get your spin on it and somehow.
In the future, 5 or 10 years from now, do you have like a dream or passion project? Do you want to write a book?
In 5 or 10 years time, I hope to have covered a World Cup. That's my biggest dream. That's what I want to do more than anything. I want to be at all of these events, telling really, really interesting stories and enjoying life around football.
And then what is your last one final piece of advice or message you would tell your like 10-year-old self?
Keep doing what you love, man, because that's what took me to where I am now. Like reading about football, writing about football, watching football, listening to football. What if I just kind of lost love with football? What would I be doing now? Even if it's not what your friends want to do. Like my friends didn't care about listening to football podcasts. I was a bit strange in that sense where I was like 12, 13 years old, right at the start of the kind of wave of podcasts, and I was sitting in my room listening to football podcasts. That was weird, but it was what I love to do. And don't let anybody kind of sidetrack you from that, because eventually it kind of took me to where I am now. So if you want to be a film journalist or any other industry, just keep doing it, man. And as long as it makes you happy, if it gets to a stage where you think, I no longer like film, for example, I want to do something else, then do that. But do what you love, I think, is the most important thing.
A massive thanks to Elias, as I wish you the best in your writing career. And please drop a like on the video, because if it wasn't for him, this video wouldn't be possible. But if you want to see more, check this interview out.